Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, Key Considerations and Best Practices for Effective Integration. My name is Marisa and I'm the Managing Social Worker here at CILA, and I'm going to be joined by Yvonne Mendoza and Jasmine Jawar, and you'll get to meet them in a bit. But we want to say that we're so happy to have you all here, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Some of you are very familiar with CILA, but for those who are not, if this is your first time joining one of our trainings, let me just tell you a little bit about us. We are a project of the American Bar Association Commission on Immigration. We are based in Houston, Texas, but we have a staff in various parts of the US, San Francisco, no, not anymore, Chicago, San Diego, San Antonio, Austin, Dallas, I think. And we are a legal resource center, and we provide 4 key services. We provide legal and social service technical assistance on case-specific questions relating to children and youth with immigration cases. We also host regular trainings such as this one. Most of them are recorded and available on our website. We develop written resources, which are also available on our website, so please check us out. We have 6 working groups, 1 Texas specific and 5 national ones. And this is to provide a space for advocates to collaborate. So again, thank you for being here. But before moving on with the presentation, I would like to discuss just some housekeeping matters. This webinar is going to be recorded. It's going to be an hour-and-a-half long webinar. We ask you to please use the Q&A box for questions rather than the chat box. This is going to help us keep track of the questions. And we're going to reserve the time to answer questions at the end, but you could post them throughout the webinar, but we'll address them at the end. But if for some reason we're not able to get to your question, we'll follow up by email. But also know that you could always submit a technical assistance request. The materials for this webinar are going to be, including the recording and the slides, and also the reading resource that we're going to be highlighting here are going to be available on our website and the webpage created specifically for this webinar. Also, at the end, there's going to be a feedback survey that is going to pop out as soon as the webinar ends. You're going to get a survey that pops out on your screen. Please take a brief moment to let us know your thoughts of today's training, and also if you have any ideas of future topics that you would like for us to cover. Some CLE information here. This training has been approved for CLE 1.5 hours for 60-minute stays and 1.8 hours for 50-minute stays. Please use the link that you were provided when you registered. That's going to help us verify your attendance to this webinar. We recommend that you stay throughout the entire webinar so we could verify your attendance for its entirety. We're going to be providing a CLE code. We're going to announce it verbally, and we're also going to be displaying it on the PowerPoint. Please write it down as you're going to be asked this code when you request CLE. We're also going to be emailing you an attendance verification form after the webinar. Probably maybe a day, maybe later today, or maybe tomorrow, but soon you're going to get that form. Please provide that form back before the deadline. I'll include the deadline on the email. Again, it's so encouraging to see so many of you here today, as it reflects the growing commitment among organizations for holistic services. I always like to say, and maybe it's cliche, but I always like to say it takes a village. And all of us here, all of you here, whether social workers, attorneys, legal staff, or social service professionals, know how true that is. Each of you brings a unique expertise, perspective, and skills to the table. And when the collaboration does occur and the support we provide to the youth becomes more significantly impactful. Of course, we recognize that the merging of professions, the integration process is not without its challenges. It's coming to encounter bumps along the way, especially when adapting to changes. Our goal with this webinar is to share the insights we have gained from the research and process of the development of a reading resource, which has a long title. Bear with me, is Collaborative Efforts to Immigration Relief, a call for integration of social workers and lawyers. We're going to be highlighting key points lessons learned, and best practices to help you navigate these challenges and strengthen your collaboration within your teams. We're going to give you an overview of the reading resource and the intention behind it. We're going to be discussing the importance of clearly defining roles within the interdisciplinary team. We're going to be highlighting some points that will help you understand the social work profession. We'll look at different program structures, models, and frameworks. We're going to be covering the range of professional duties that social workers and attorneys have. We're going to outline the best practices and key considerations that emerge from the interviews. And at the end, we're going to have time for Q&A. Again, if for some reason we don't get to your question, we'll follow up with you, or you could also submit a technical assistance question. Thank you. But let's have some fun for now. Let's kick things off with a fun icebreaker to test your knowledge about the various credentials that us social workers can hold. See how much you know, and maybe you'll learn a few things along the way. So please join us by scanning the QR code on your slide or by going to slido.com and inserting the number on your screen, 32000059. We'll give everyone a moment to log on, and I'll launch the first question. Here we go. First question, which of the following statement is false? Okay. Seems that most of you know. Okay, I see the popcorn still going, but yes, the correct answer is LMFTs and LPCs are not they're not social workers. These acronyms, they stand for licensed marriage and family therapists or licensed professional counselors, which are distinct professions. You, of course, might wish to hire one of these professionals, but know that they're not social workers. The next question here, which social worker credentials requires passing a clinical exam and completing supervised clinical hours? I'll give it a little more. See the popcorn being pretty active. That is correct. LCSW, which stands for Licensed Clinical Social Worker. It is a credential that requires individuals to pass a clinical exam and complete a certain number of supervised hours. What are services that LCSWs can offer that an LMSW cannot? And let's see what the answer is. They cannot offer, sorry, my phone. They cannot offer clinical diagnosis independently. And LCSW is licensed to offer clinical diagnosis independently, whereas a licensed social worker is not. Additionally, LMSWs nor LCSWs can prescribe medications. What additional qualifications does an LCSWS have compared to an LCSW? So the S is the key there. Okay. One of the requirements to obtain an LCSW credential is that an MSW or LMSW have to complete a determinant of supervised clinical hours. That varies by state. Here in Texas, it's 3,000, but some states are as low as 1,500 up to 6,000 in some states. And the LCSWS is the one that provides that supervision for us. Which credentials represents the highest academic degree in social work? This should be an easy one. Yes, that is a doctoral in social work or a PhD in social work. There's a little difference in both. They're very similar, but yes, that is the highest credentials that a social worker can achieve. Do social workers have the duties of confidentiality? Let's see, what do you guys know about this one? Okay. Yes, there is. And of course, there's some nuances that we're going to be exploring here with you today. So depending on your org, social workers need to be aware and may need to abide by attorneys' duties of confidentiality, but it may surprise you for some. It might surprise some attorneys to learn that social workers also have their own set of confidentiality rules and standards set forth by state law and the National Association of Social Worker Ethics. There we go. Okay, so let's meet the presenters. I am one of the presenters, so I'll introduce myself a little. I'll tell you a little bit about me. I've been a social worker for my whole professional career. I've been a social worker for a long time. I've worked in many interdisciplinary organizations, but CILA is my first legal interdisciplinary organization. So I have learned so much. Prior to CILA, I was a therapist providing psychotherapy and mental health support to unaccompanied youth in one of our shelters here in Houston. And now I'm so happy to pass the spotlight to my colleague, Jasmine Jabbar, and also Yvonne Mendoza, who are going to be taking over from here.
Yvonne, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's so good to see so many of you from all around the countries. My name is Yvonne Mendoza. I am a clinical assistant professor at the University of Houston Graduate College of Social Work, where I primarily teach on confronting oppression, race, and dynamics, including clinical concentration courses. I have over 10 years of experience in multiple settings, and my goal has always been integration, both in schools and healthcare settings, and also previously with a nonprofit organization in legal services. And I want to take this time also, and I'm so grateful to CILA for asking me to be able to partner with them in creating this, and especially grateful to Marissa, Yasmin, and Dalia. So I'm excited to share all the things that have come up from this resource, and I'll pass it over to Yasmin.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. Hi, everyone. I am an attorney here at CILA. I am not a social worker, but I've had the opportunity to work closely with Marisa over the last few years and with Yvonne more recently on the written resource we're going to talk about today. In my previous life, offering legal services, direct immigration legal services to adults and children, I did not have the opportunity to work alongside social workers. So working with Marisa and Yvonne has really been a learning experience for me. My mother was a social worker before becoming a psychiatric nurse, so I certainly had some exposure to the profession, but not nearly enough. I just want to thank Marisa and Yvonne for all the knowledge they've shared with me throughout this process, and I did very well on the quiz because of it.
We'll get started then.
Yes. I'm going to start by giving you all an overview of the written resource. This is what the cover looks like, and we actually just posted it to our website yesterday, and I'm going to tell you how to access it in just a second. But first, I wanted to share with you our intentions in creating the resource. So why we wanted to do this in the first place and what we wanted to accomplish. First, we really wanted to help legal staff understand the social work profession better. And I write us included because it's CILA included in that. CILA has a lot of attorneys. We actually have 8 attorneys. And we've either had 1 or 2 social workers over the course of the past few years. So we've had a lot of learning to do just internally about the social work profession. We also wanted to offer some examples of functioning programs. So some of those are newer and some of them have existed for decades, but there are some organizations. There are 6 lovely organizations that Yvonne was able to interview and talk to, and they're located in 6 different states. So even though there are resources that are already out there, A lot of them are state specific. We wanted to offer something more national in scope, more broad. And so Yvonne did talk to organizations in 6 different states, and she'll tell you what those states were. We also had in mind this phrase, which is you don't know what you don't know. And putting this resource together, I realized that we're just beginning to scratch the surface. Knowledge is, of course, key to intentionality. So we wanted to provide you with information that could help fuel your intentionality in creating your programs. There are lots of nuances, lots of variations in terms of how integration can play out depending on state law and depending also on your chosen organization structure. So we wanted to offer a starting point for additional organizational conversations. We also wanted to let you know that we at CILA are here for you and to offer up our technical assistance. We have an interdisciplinary team here at CILA, so do reach out for help. Many of you have already done that, and you know that some of the questions you've brought to us are very big ones, and we don't have all the answers right away, but we can connect you with others who have moved forward on addressing similar challenges and can offer sort of their lessons learned as they've worked to implement their social services programs. Next, I also wanted to just offer some considerations, sort of a framework for us to keep in mind before we leap into the resource. The key takeaway here is that some variation exists by state on a lot of the rules that we're looking at. But today we're going to speak in broad terms that should provide you with some helpful information regardless of jurisdiction. So as you can see here, the rules governing both the attorney and social work professions vary by state. Right? So there's variations in the rules regarding licensing and the conduct for social work professionals by state. There's also a variation in the attorney ethical rules by state. There are also variations in the rules governing mandatory reporting. So they vary by state and by profession. So in some states, both professions have to report, and in other states, only social workers have this duty. Also, we have to think about attorney-client privilege rules, which we're going to get into later, but they are a way to protect client communications in court. And the rules are evidentiary rules, they're state and they're federal, and they vary. And there are nuances regarding whether a court would consider a communication privileged based on the nature of the communication and also the persons involved. So in short, really digging deep into these rules requires a careful analysis of case law. So I just told you there's a lot of variations. What do we do with all that? Well, to develop your organization's approach, it can be helpful to look at a model in your state, an existing model. And again, we're going to offer 6 different state models here. And also to look at a state with similar rules if you don't have an example from your own state. I also want to just note one more consideration, which is we are speaking to various audiences today. We're speaking to social workers, legal staff, attorneys. Some part of this presentation may seem like a piece of cake for you. I imagine the social workers on the training all aced the quiz earlier. But we do hope that everyone takes away some new knowledge today. We do have a section later that really highlights attorney professional rules that I hope social workers find helpful and also interesting. Okay. I wanted to offer you these because as I was really learning and studying up as we worked on this resource, these were the key resources that I went to. And if you're early in your journey of adding social services to your LSP, this is where I would start. They're companions, I think, to the resource we're sharing today. And the first 3 are very much focused on social services programs at immigration legal service providers. All of them are very helpful. So just links for you, and you'll get the slides. You can get them now on the training webpage, or you can access them later, and you'll have the links to these. Finally, I just wanted to tell you how to get to the resource. So ta-da, this is it. And it's linked to here on this slide. This is the table of contents. The resource is available on our website by creating a free CILA account. If you haven't created a CILA account before, it's easy. You just fill out a form, and then our staff will approve it. For attorneys, you can choose from a magenta, pink, or purple free account. For non-attorneys, like social workers, you can sign up for a green account. And all of the different colors have access to the resource. With that, I'm going to pass the virtual mic over to Yvonne to tell us more about what she already knew and what she learned as part of the process of creating this resource.
Thank you so much, Yasmin. So often, I've learned so much being back with lawyers, and so grateful for the opportunity to go over this. So the way that this is going to work is that you're going to be able to see sort of the progression of how the manual goes. So I'm essentially giving you a snapshot, a scope of what you'll be able to read in your own time. So understanding the social work profession, let's start with language. Part of what you will see in the resource is that it's really important for us as social workers that our colleagues who happen to be a part of the legal world understand our common words, language that we speak with one another, language that is very common to us. And that is where we start when we talk about intentional integration. Obviously, many of us come out of our training, we come out of our programs ready to go out into different settings, whether that's healthcare, whether that's school. And many of the people here today have decided to go into LSPs. So it is vital that that language is shared among professions. It's vital that just like social workers have to learn the legal language given where they are working, we also ask the same in return. Why? Well, even while creating this manual, this happened to us a lot. I would say things like, I must disclose informed consent. And Yasmin thought I was saying something completely different because her informed consent means something different. Or I must disclose confidentiality. What does confidentiality mean to a lawyer versus what it means to a social worker based on our professional training? All of these things came up. So this is where we start. I know it may seem simple and easy, but this is where we sort of get to the nitty-gritty to avoid chaos, to avoid conflicts in the future, and to really avoid having the client involved in sort of our confusion. So what you will see in the resource is that we have created a glossary of terms where you'll be able to see some of the common words that I use throughout the resource that are very social work terminology. And so, but this is it. Next, you may think like, what do all of these letters mean in the social work profession? We have a lot. The social workers here are sitting back thinking, yes, and even that varies by state. I want you to know that the social work profession is incredibly detailed. It's extensive, and at its core, our profession is social justice and client-led. That is what makes us up. But our training is in depth, and we want you to know that, and we want you to know that why. Because we want you to know who you want to hire. We want you to understand who we are so that you know who to pick for the role that you need fulfilled in your organization. So a couple of the basics for most social work programs and for most social workers is that many of them have practice within their graduate training or undergraduate training, anywhere at minimum between 400 and 900 hours. If anybody carries an L in front of their letters, it means that they are licensed and they have sat for licensure exams based on their state, that they've done the rigorous testing, have sat for the 3-hour exams, and have passed their exams. Each of the letters obviously stands for something. The L, meaning licensure, they've passed a state exam. The B or the M is either bachelor's level or master's level. It's indicating what type of training and specialization they've been a part of. And then SW obviously stands for social work. What we want you to know is that a lot of social workers who are ready to walk into LSPs and work alongside you also have dual degrees. That's a very common thing for us. And so they'll come out with either a social work degree and a JD, an MBA, and or have doctorate level training. And then if this is not new to you or not, we know this as social workers, but our profession is regulated. It's highly regulated by different entities and agencies, all of which will be detailed in the resource for you. I'm using the acronyms now, but don't worry, you'll be able to read a little bit more about them. That's the ASWB, the NASW, the CSWE, and state licensing boards. All of those make up our requirements, either during our graduate training and also what happens once we're in practice. So now you know the letters, you need to understand sort of our language so that you can get to know us a little better and know where we're coming from. But this is really important for me to highlight, and you'll see more about this in the resource, that the title of a social worker is reserved for an individual who earned a degree in social work. That may seem silly, but oftentimes social workers in various settings, I have found this a lot in the healthcare setting, is because they do social work type roles, they are given the default name of the social worker, and that's actually not the case. Social workers earn that degree because they earn that title because of their degree. I want you to know that the very people that are in your offices and LSPs working alongside of you have extensive training in human behavior in the social environment. They understand the effects of trauma, what that does to the brain, both physiological, emotional, physical as well. They understand impacts of systems of oppression and how that relates to the legal system. They take into account intersectionality and positionality as a framework to analyze and intervene in social policies, why things are the way that they are for certain types of people, and how race and power and class are part of those dynamics. Graduate level trainees have therapeutic training in various modalities. And they see all of this, including the clients and the systems that they work for, within a social justice framework. So I also have to note that there is a distinction between role titles of a social worker, social service coordinator, case manager, or therapist. It's important that you know why we're calling the social worker what we are calling them. The title matters because it then leads to what they will fulfill in that role. And I also want to note that within our profession, we have amazing other mental health professionals that exist that do similar work, but have a different education, scope of practice, and license requirements that differ from us. We've mentioned two of them, licensed marriage and family therapists and licensed professional counselors. We do similar work, but we are different. Okay. So what are some of our values? Why does it matter? It matters because all of this is going to lead up to what our role, how we envision our roles and where we work from. It is very vital that LSPs understand that most of us come with this ingrained training. We are driven by client self-determination and social justice. It's at the top of all of our training. And because of our training, social workers are able to bear witness to migratory experiences of their clients and analyze things like traumatic grief and complex care at the same time. The client is sitting in front of us. We're listening for legal stuff. We're listening for traumatic things. We're listening to them. We're watching their bodies. All of this is happening at the same time that we're with our clients. We prioritize client autonomy. And if the client wants to go slow, we're going to slow down. If the client doesn't want to share, we're not going to press. That is part of our values, and that is going to show up in the way that we work within LSPs. Social workers address the broader social and emotional needs and overall well-being. We're looking at all of the things that are missing, while also looking at how resilient and brave and amazing these kids are and what is working for them at the same time. Social workers with graduate training are able to provide and look at clients within a therapeutic framework. And we are rooted in cultural humility and prioritize understanding and applying critical self-reflection, self-awareness, self-regulation, and navigate different biases. We inherently, at the bottom of all of this, one of our main values is that we do believe that clients are the expert of their own lives. As tragic as their lives have been, as messy as their lives are, they are the experts of their own lives, and we follow them. So Why does this all matter? Again, think about the progression of the resource. This matters because we walk into how social workers communicate. What does this mean? I've mentioned language and why that's important. I've mentioned who we are and why these letters matter within our training. I've talked to you about our values and how that's going to come up in the way that we communicate with each other and within LSPs. So just know this will be in more detail in the manual, that we have potentially similar communication styles. Well, I've worked extensively now with Yasmin and Marissa really over the last 7 months, probably working on this resource. And I can tell with Yasmin that there is active listening and empathic communication and nonverbals. So that exists already within LSPs, and I want to highlight that. However, social workers are really trained not only to actively do these types of communication styles, but also elicit these types of communication styles within their clients. They use that as part of their therapeutic role to be able to get to where the organization needs the client to get to. So within any LSP, really within any organization, there might be some conflict in communication. That this is why we're talking about intentional integration. And so I provide possible strategies to really help and develop that within your organizations, whether that's establishing clear lines. This is my role. This is my expertise as a social worker, or this is your expertise as a legal service provider. Define our roles and responsibilities, develop a shared understanding. Vital to sort of enhance communication is develop a plan of how crisis is handled within the organization. Obviously recognize the expertise that both parties bring, and find ways to regularly provide feedback and evaluate. This may sound completely easy, but it's in the doing. It's in the doing and implementing that this becomes part of the foundation for intentional integration. So that also gives me a break to sip some water, and hopefully you're getting the groove of where I'm going with this. So Yvonne gets very excited about talking about social work. So here we go. We're going to talk about the role definition. And so we're walking into, you're sitting in your organization, you're thinking about the makeup of the organization. Are you ready to hire a social worker? Okay, so I want you to think about the social work within the LSP should be understood and well-defined by everyone in the organization. That's not just the managing attorney. That's not just the executive director of the program. That is everyone that has some stake in the game. Why are we hiring this social worker? Are we ready to hire a social worker? Why is this important? Why must we start here? One, we want to avoid role confusion, right? If one person thinks we're hiring the social worker because we need some of the details of the cases to be caught, that's very different if somebody else is hiring a social worker because they have a lot of cases who have experienced heavy trauma. It's vital. It's vital that we know why we're hiring them. And also, I have to say this for the sake of my colleagues, is utilize us, the social work profession and social workers, strictly for situations that involve human behavior in a social emotional lens. And I'll go more in depth in this in the resource. Why are you hiring them? Is it because you need some administrative tasks done? If so, that's not us, right? Do you need support that social workers can provide? Because we don't want to underutilize or inappropriately utilize the social worker's role. We don't. They're specialized, highly trained individuals who have spent years in school, many of them years in practice. Let's use them for the benefit of the kids. And then obviously you think you're ready to hire a social worker. You need to determine what professional you want to hire. Are we talking bachelor's level, master's, licensed clinical social worker? Maybe you don't want a social worker. Maybe you've looked at LPCs and LMFTs. We need to decide where you are going before you hire them. Now, don't panic. Many of you are sitting here and thinking, we've integrated. We have these people here. That's okay. We just really want, this is why I call it a call to integration, an intentional integration, because there are times we have to restructure the way that we are doing things to really utilize both parties. So to further assess readiness, is your answer yes to the questions below? Okay, are your clients needing more than legal relief? Are your clients experiencing severe post-traumatic stress disorder? Are your clients having difficulty communicating with their lawyer and legal representative? Do they need mental health support or care? Are you noticing chronic traumatic experiences? And then also, would your programming benefit from social emotional health? Given that we live in Texas, yes to all of these questions, right? This is important, and you might be thinking yes to all of this. And so this is great. We are ready for that. We are ready for integration. Social workers are ready to be implemented and working within LSPs. So maybe this is where you are. This is how you assess readiness. So what need will the social worker fulfill? Okay, so you've determined that you have assessed yes for readiness. You've determined that you need a social worker within your organization. So when the organization is ready to hire a social worker, it is crucial to determine the level of expertise required for the position. Why? Because it is unfair to any party, and it's unfair to us as social workers, that you're wanting a clinical person for diagnosis, but you hired someone who cannot do that based on their licensing requirements, based on their training. It failed everybody, okay? So I want you to think about, are you wanting a case manager? Are you wanting somebody that does case management? That's direct client support through assessment and coordination of services. That's biopsychosocial assessment and service plan, only when needed. It's a service coordination and advocacy. And this party is involved in crisis management organizational plan. Now I have to highlight that the social worker is not the crisis management team. The social worker is part of that team and involved in the creation of that plan. Is this who you are wanting? Is this who you need? Maybe that's the case management role. Or you may need a clinical case management. So that may be somebody that is a little more highly trained in biopsychosocial assessment and service plan, particularly looking at mental health needs, psychiatric history, symptoms, functional impairments, social supports. They need individualized treatment plans that are based on client strengths and preference goals. You may have clients with a lot of recurring issues. It could be substance use with mental health disorders. Do you need somebody able to manage that? Oftentimes, they are graduate level in LCSWs who can support mental health traumas that require specialized therapeutic care. And also somebody who's available to provide psychoeducation regarding behavioral health and consultation with families. And again, someone involved in the crisis management organizational plan. In the resource, you'll be able to see this in more detail, and we're going to talk about what each of these roles mean later on in the presentation. So, is it the case manager? Is it the clinical case management role that you need to fulfill? Or is it a role of a therapist? What is it that your agency needs? What is it that your children need? How does that look like? If it's a therapist role, then they're not a case manager. It's not a one-time deal. They are really someone who is with the client for multiple sessions. They are graduate level, oftentimes LCSW or clinically licensed. They are able to provide assessment, diagnosis, and clinical treatment. They use diagnostic tools and criteria to assess and diagnose mental health disorders. They provide psychotherapy and counseling, and they come with a variety of abilities to do that with different modalities and approaches. And they're able to provide program development and evaluation for preventative programs and social emotional need programs. And I also want to note that sometimes LCSWs, especially in that role, are able to provide supervision to LMSWs who can do this level of this role with the supervision of an LC. Okay, so that's a lot of information, I know. So we're just gonna take a couple of breaths here. I hope I'm good with time. And we're going to talk about the program structure. So now what? You know our values, you're understanding our language, you're thinking about you're assessing your readiness for a social worker. You've decided you wanted a social worker. You've decided what role they need to fulfill. Now we're walking into the actual structure of your program. So let's look at intentional integration and organization structure. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a lot of words. Don't worry. All of this is detailed in the resource. Okay, and also you'll have these slides to work with. But I want us to think about a couple of things. We're about to walk in to the structure, but prior to walking into the structure, your agency needs to sit with this. Your LSP needs to sit with this. You need to identify the best pathway for your organization. And that needs to be understood from the beginning by lawyers and social workers. What needs to be understood? The attorney's duty to confidentiality, the attorney's duty of candor, and the attorney-client privilege rules. Vital before it gets messy. We need to understand these. Lawyers also need to understand that social workers are bound to and trained to maintain professional ethics and confidentiality. What we want to remind, and what I want to remind legal service providers and lawyers, and often the conversation we had over the past couple of months in creating this resource, is that social workers are trained to maintain their ethics. We're ingrained just as much as lawyers are, but things they become a little different when working with attorneys. Social workers straight out of graduate school may not know this, just as lawyers may not know that social workers come with professional ethics and confidentiality. So it is vital for LSPs to get acquainted with the 23 points that are detailed also in the resource by the NASW that outlines the national standard of confidentiality. That's a lot of points, and many of us had to memorize all of those and be ready to practice with our clients. With the integration of social work knowledge, okay, so not a part and not a thought after, but really from the beginning and as the foundation, the LSP should be able to answer, what are our professional state confidentiality regulations of both parties? How do you define confidentiality? How do you define informed consent? What is that going to look like based on your state jurisdiction for your LSP? All of this should be discussed, talked with, and through either pre-hiring, or if they're hired, collaborate, come back to the table and decide what is it that you are saying yes and no to. Okay. All right. So we are going to move into the service models. So in the resource, what you will see is a thorough breakdown of the service models. And of course, I want to take the time today, which I know many of them may be with us, the 6 organizations that really provided me their time and their knowledge, and the social workers provided me with their time and knowledge, from Arizona, California, Florida, Nebraska, New York, and Texas. I'm so grateful to you. The way that we use the information is that we extracted these themes from those interviews. And this is how we've come up with 3 different service models that we hope you will be able to implement or use some of that for your LSPs, okay? So let's go into service model 1 that we've called the case management model. Okay, who is this designed for? This is for organizations that have not previously employed a social worker, but recognize the need for a more comprehensive approach. Maybe this is you. Maybe you're in an organization where you're like, yes, we're ready for this. We need this. What is the goal? First and foremost, I want to advocate that when you hire a social worker, and especially if you're about to hire your first social worker, that you actually hired two, okay? That somehow in the request for funding and in thinking about your programmatic efforts, that you do all that is possible to hire two social workers at inception. This model utilizes a referral-based approach, meaning that the legal provider will see their client, they realize that they are in need of social services, that they are in need of a social worker, and they are going to refer. The social worker will intervene on a needs-based assessment, providing resources to the client. Okay, this means that they are answering the need, and then that's it. The recommendation is that the social worker should not have clients on their caseload linger, meaning that once that need is met, the social worker is able to release that client back to you and back into the process of their migration, through their migration process. The social worker should not be expected to see the same client for more than 4 visits. Why? Because we want to make sure that you're following service model 1. If you need this child to be seen for multiple sessions, that means that they need a greater level of care. Okay, so I want you to take that into account. The recommended caseload. Okay, this is really important, and I hope this makes social workers proud and maybe LSPs nervous. But the recommended caseload to avoid burnout and vicarious trauma is 24 to 28 clients. How did Yvonne Mendoza come up with that number? Literature. Okay, our research tells us that vicarious trauma is real and burnout is very real for social workers, as is with LSPs and lawyers and legal providers. But we want to be able to make sure and retain the social worker, retain that programming that you have worked through, which means you've got to limit. You have to limit the amount of clients. Case management is not crisis intervention. It's not. It is they are answering a one-time need, okay? A crisis response should be implemented organization-wide and implemented by all staff. Service model 2. So service model 2 is called clinical case management, okay? This is designed for organizations that have not previously employed a social worker, but recognize the need for a more comprehensive approach. So it doesn't mean that you have to start in service model 1, and then once service model 1 is implemented, you can move into service model 2. No, the service models are fluid, meaning that if you assess the need within your LSP and you need service model 2, then hire for service model 2, okay? So do not utilize one social worker for multiple service models. What do I mean by that? You can have service model 1 and service model 2 in your LSP. Great. I hope you do. I hope you have all service models within your LSP, because then we're talking about integrated holistic care. However, do not use the same social worker for all 3 models. It's not going to work. One, that's not fair to the social worker, but also it's not going to work, okay? Because each of these models should come with the specific social worker. They are fulfilling a specific role and providing specific services. This request for service would be through a referral from the legal department. This referral is not a one-time need. This is potentially someone who's going to need to be walked alongside with. The social worker will meet with the client for an assessment to determine biopsychosocial needs. Social worker may implement assessment tools and screeners to determine severity of symptoms. They might use the PTSD-RI. They might use the PHQ-9. They're using screeners to determine we're dealing with depression, we're dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. Usually, this is going to be about 6 to 12 sessions. So the meeting with the client so that they can alleviate some symptoms so that they can continue through their migration process. The recommended client caseload for this is 16 to 20 clients. Obviously, it's reduced. Why? Because they're working with the client more in depth. They're potentially getting into the traumatic history. which means higher level of vicarious trauma and burnout. So now we move to service model 3. And this is what we're calling the clinical therapy model, okay? And this is for organizations with sufficient team members to provide comprehensive therapeutic traditional support for mental health needs. This integrated approach provides specialized care and yields significant benefits for immigration relief and court proceedings. An assessment and mental health screener would be completed by a client with their clinician. Potential batteries and standardized tests that determine criteria and severity of diagnosis would be implemented. Diagnosis could be provided by that licensed clinician. The clinician would determine the level of sessions needed with this client. How much are we going to really need to sit together? Is this going to be 12 weeks? Is this going to be 6 months? The recommended client caseload does not exceed 16 clients. We're talking about people who have multiple chronic traumas. And maybe you're thinking, goodness, that's all our clients. And the reality is, I believe you. I do. And so think about the model of care. Be intentional about where you are walking so that social workers can meet that. And that you could look at your LSP and say, okay, we're integrated here in this way. Okay, I'm going to pass it on to Yasmin.
Thanks so much, Yvonne. So helpful to see the service models, and I know there are a lot more details in the actual resource. So check it out, everyone. Right now, we're going to dive into professional duties and how those might factor into an integration. I'm going to come at this from an attorney perspective because I'm an attorney, and each of the rules is going to serve as a building block to then discussing organization structure and how the duties relate. So Yvonne touched on some of this before, but we're really going to get in depth. Stay with me. Let's build this together. So I want to start with the ways in which information that clients provide to us is safeguarded. And this is key in both professions to ensure that we can develop a strong rapport and are effectively able to serve our clients. We're going to talk first about the duty of confidentiality, and the rules for both attorneys and social workers generally require us to keep information confidential and to share it only with the client's consent. An attorney's duty of confidentiality is provided for in attorney ethical rules. Remember, these vary by state. There are model rules of professional conduct from the ABA, and states adopt the ABA rules verbatim or vary from them, sometimes just slightly. On the specific duty of confidentiality, if you wanted to compare, just as an example, Texas and New York, you can see them linked here, and there are variations. One of those variations is in the use of the terms may and shall. So some states require attorneys to reveal confidential information to prevent death or substantial bodily harm. Those say you shall reveal information. Others allow you to as an attorney, but they don't require you to, and they use the may. You may reveal the information. Social workers also have confidentiality rules that vary by state, and they look, as Yvonne mentioned, to the National Association of Social Workers and their Code of Ethics for guidance. That code provides that social workers should generally protect the confidentiality of all information obtained in the course of offering their professional services, except for compelling professional reasons. Not unlike many attorney rules, a social worker's duty of confidentiality does not prevent disclosure if necessary to prevent, and these are the words from the NASW Code of Ethics, serious, foreseeable, and imminent harm to a client or others. Next, I want to talk about the attorney-client privilege, which is another way that client information we gain in the course of representation is safeguarded, but the context here is different. Because there's not often discovery in our immigration cases, I think it's hard to get a grasp of this concept sometimes, but it functions as a sort of shield. So if the privilege is successfully asserted, a client can refuse to disclose and prevent any other person from disclosing communications made to facilitate the rendition of the professional legal services. It is not absolute, however, which means there are some exceptions. One example is if a client is seeking your advice to carry out a criminal act, no privilege there. The privilege can also be waived, as in when a third party is present during the privileged communication. If it's someone essential to the communication between the client and the attorney, like an interpreter, then you're okay. Unlike confidentiality rules, which are ethical, privilege rules are evidentiary, and there's a ton of case law on the nuances of privilege as parties battle out whether it applies in court or whether it's been waived. Why does it matter here? We're going to talk about this more in just a minute, but in a nutshell, if social workers are functioning as part of the legal team, then there's an argument that communications with them are still protected by the attorney-client privilege. Excuse me. Okay, so we just finished talking about how we're able to safeguard information, but now we're going to talk about when we have to reveal it. And this is on top of any harm exception we already discussed when we talked about confidentiality. So here we're looking at two things: an attorney's duty of candor and any mandatory reporting duty an attorney may have. Social workers may be unfamiliar with the duty of candor because it really involves the role of attorney as an officer of the court. It's a duty of truthfulness to the tribunal, which applies in our cases to the immigration court, before the state courts, and also before adjudicating agencies, so in our case, USCIS. I highlighted some of the language here, and note that this is a model rule, so you need to check your state rule for the exact language that applies where you are. But the model rule says that a lawyer can't knowingly lie about facts or the law or offer evidence that the lawyer knows to be false. So that's in the present, but it also requires us to go back and fix things later if we come to know of the falsity later. You see this language about taking reasonable remedial measures. As an example, one case stands out in my mind in which a child was seeking special immigrant juvenile findings from a state court and indicated to her attorney that her father was deceased and even provided a death certificate showing that. The attorney used the information and death certificate in the state court proceedings. When the attorney learned the information was false, she had to go back and inform the state court. This doesn't happen a lot, not trying to cause alarm, but it is one example. On mandatory reporting, social workers are typically mandatory reporters, right? But only some states require attorneys to report child abuse or neglect. In Texas, for example, there's an express provision in the statute that says, hey, attorneys, the privilege doesn't help you here, you have to report. And I've highlighted and linked here a CILA resource on Texas mandatory reporting requirements in case it's helpful to anyone here today. The last building block among our duties is this one, and it has to do with non-lawyer assistance. I've provided here the ABA model rule, and you should read the whole thing in your state's version, but it basically says that attorneys are responsible for ensuring that the non-attorneys they work with also comply with attorney professional obligations. Again, we're going to get into this in just a second, but the idea is that social workers who are part of a legal team could be enveloped under the attorney's duties and need to abide by the duty of confidentiality and the duty of candor. In other words, what's mine is mine, and now what's mine as an attorney is also yours as a non-attorney on the team. Okay. Now we've sort of worked through our building blocks of duties, and we have a couple of organization structures to consider. Let's start with this one, where the social worker is part of the legal team. This structure is characterized by the free flow of information among team members, lawyers and non-lawyers, social workers alike. The attorney, based on Rule 5.3 that we just talked about regarding non-lawyer assistance, is going to need to ensure that non-lawyers on the team comply with the attorney's ethical rules. With confidentiality, that means a social worker may not be able to report if the attorney can't report. And we're talking about mandatory reporting, because doing so would violate confidentiality and could break privilege. But remember, even where the lawyer is not a mandatory reporter, there are the harm exceptions that may cover some abuse or neglect situations. If you're interested in the analysis for this, there are some ethics opinions I can share for social workers who reasonably may have some hesitation as to the effects of this on their mandatory reporting duties. I can also share some information as to certain jurisdictions where sort of this setup has been expressly recognized and social workers have been, by statute, covered under the privilege where they work on a legal team. With candor, It means the attorney needs to know what non-lawyers on the team know. So for example, if the client tells the social worker about an arrest and the attorney doesn't know, it may be that this information has to be disclosed to the adjudicator if it's relevant to the relief sought. The key takeaways with this organization structure is that social work hires need to understand the implications of the structure like this from the outset. I know Yvonne and I talked about this, and it can be quite the culture shock for a social worker who's coming from a different setting and is unfamiliar with this approach to information sharing and reporting. So it's good to have these conversations when you're interviewing. It's also key, of course, for the client to understand how their information will be shared across disciplines within your organization. We're going to move on to a second org structure to consider. And in this one, the social worker is very much functioning independently of the legal team. They're still an employee of the organization, but there are restrictions on the sharing of information between the social workers and the legal team. With this setup, attorneys need to be mindful of the attorney-client privilege because sharing information with the social worker can be like sharing information with a third party. Also, with this setup, there's no enveloping of the social worker in the attorney's duties of confidentiality and candor. Rule 5.3, which we discussed earlier, just doesn't kick in. And the social worker here is going to be required to report under their mandatory reporting rules, right? There's no argument about attorney confidentiality and privilege. As far as key takeaways, again, it's key to explain the setup to the client. And in this case, to explain the restrictions on the information sharing, the client should discuss their legal case only with the legal team. It's also key to consider privacy walls or restrictions on access to files and database information because a social worker could learn information that would require them to mandatory report from the attorney records. And then on the flip side, the attorney could learn information from the social work records that implicate their duty of candor. So the need to keep information separate in a structure like this will require a lot of planning. It's going to affect everything from who supervises who to shared space to the client's consent to share any information with the other team. Think separate departments with basic information in referrals, but very limited ongoing communication. So these are two models to consider. And with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Yvonne for best practices.
Thank you, Yasmin. And before we move to best practices, I just want to add that the CILA team and I went back and forth, trying to really figure out and flesh out and provide as much detail as possible in ways to fully integrate while respecting each of our professions. And it takes time. It does. It takes a lot of time, and it takes slowing down. And that can be hard, especially when the amount of minors are coming into the country, when your organizations are needed to fill in this gap. But in order to really maintain your growing LSP, one that wants to be fully integrated, I highly recommend that you just take some time and figure out what these things are at the beginning so that there aren't issues in the future. And so now I want to move forward and think about and give you just a couple of key considerations. So first of all, you're here. Your desire is a key consideration for effective integration. It makes me so incredibly happy to see over 200 participants come and think about this. And I hope you're not leaving alarmed or like, goodness, what are we doing? Or we have a lot to do. No, the reality is that there is desire, and that's really the best place to start. I want you to think about after integration, and what really could be useful for your LSPs is case staffing as a means of collaboration. Oftentimes, social workers in other interdisciplinary settings, case staffing is just part of what they do. They meet on a bi-weekly basis, they meet on a weekly basis, and they talk about the cases, especially those that are difficult or those that need to move along in the process. Why? This facilitates various perspectives. We need to hear, social workers need to hear why the legal team is taking this angle. We want the legal team to hear why we're taking this angle. And oftentimes that kind of breaks down assumptions, it clears up expectations, it clears up direction. And in the resource, you will see in more detail how my recommendation is how this should be regular and programmed. So I'm not trying to add more meetings to a very busy schedule, but how can you really use this as intentional integration? Cross-training. Again, you're here. We have a lot of legal service providers here. We have a lot of lawyers. It's important. Oftentimes, social workers and LSPs are attending a lot of legal-based trainings, and we need lawyers to do the same. We need lawyers to learn from us and our professions so that we can continue to complement interdisciplinary care and vice versa. We need social workers to continue to understand, especially Yasmin's part in the presentation about duties to confidentiality and attorney-client privilege. If that is not something that you feel confident in, let's go and figure that out. Let's go and do some training in that. And also, if possible, continue to provide these platforms and attend joint workshops where both parties are getting the information that they need. Structural changes should involve both disciplines. I think in any organizational structure, what we want is that you involve the very people that you're asking to fulfill roles, anywhere from legal aides to social workers to the lawyers. Provide that clear role and responsibility checks. Why? They're vital. They're vital to growth. They're vital to retention. They're vital so that you can see the decrease of burnout. And in the long run, it's cheaper, right? It's cheaper to be able to maintain your programming the way that it is rather than rehire and rehire and rehire. And if that is where you are at, if you are seeing sort of this revolving door, why? Okay, why? And what needs to change in order to fully secure a program? Resource allocation, secure funding for integrated services and shared resources. I wish that I could say, and then for attending this, you all get this amount to be able to hire social workers. I realize what this request is, but it is a key consideration. And the reality is we see very, very brave but fragile children, and they need us both. And I think LSPs are doing a phenomenal job of finding ways to meet the over demand. And so resource allocation is vital to the survival of LSPs, but also for holistic services. And then it's important to figure out, how are we doing? Are we tracking progress on our cases where integration is happening? Can we show our funders, look, we have this social worker sort of carrying this caseload. This is what we've seen. It fast tracks, the process of the legal proceedings. What are you tracking? And if not, start so that you're able to provide your funders with the ability to see the need for more integrated services. And I think it's always important, because it's very important for us to be client-led. What are your clients saying? How is your satisfaction with not just meeting the legal side, but having other people look at what's happening in their lives? Let's hear about that. Let's ask them how that's going and see what the difference is, so that we're able to really use that as leverage, both for funding purposes, but also for program implementation. Okay, so as we come, we're going to get to a Q&A. So, but I want us to walk into valuing the profession. And by the profession, I mean the social work profession. We are very proud of the work that we do. Oftentimes social workers know, and they hear when they go to school, that they're not walking into the profession for the money. And the reality is that oftentimes not only are social workers underutilized, but they're also underpaid, severely underpaid. So how can you value the people that are in your agency that are doing these roles? Oftentimes, one social worker to maybe 200 lawyers, right? That's tough. That's really, really tough. Compensate. That's what I can say. I compensate your social workers. Look at their salaries, make it competitive. Think about their licensure, think about the experience that they're walking into. How are you able to compensate them? Does that look like professional membership and professional development? If your agency provides this for the lawyers and the legal staff, it should provide it for the social worker, especially if you have one. And if you have many, that should not deter the agency from being able to do that. They have to, most licensed social workers have to meet a minimum required of continuing education credits. They have to pay for that. They have to renew licenses. All of that costs money. And so is that something that your budget can allocate for them? And also for them to continue to grow within the profession and attend webinars and conferences where they're able to get some more experience and look at how the profession has evolved. And then obviously professional development. Support your staff in the pursuit of that. Nobody likes stagnation. We're humans. We want to grow. We want creativity. We want to be able to move up, over, around. Does your agency have room for that? And if not, what does this mean? How can you provide the ability to be able to do that? I want you to think about case staffing and burnout. I've mentioned this often. I think there are different factors regarding case staffing and burnout. And many organizations, both as LSPs, but also in other settings, have provided ways to reduce that. Think about ways that you can involve mental health days, where you can involve paid time off, where you have supervisors and other social workers who are talking about things like burnout. This is important, which is why I talk about hiring more than one social worker. It is incredibly lonely to be the only social worker in a legal service provider agency. And not only that, but they are not able to really case staff or engage in this level of conversation with someone who has the same knowledge and expertise. It's important. Can you hire someone outside? Can you provide that level of supervision for them? And then finally, skill development and training. And also I want to add career pathways to this. Is there clear pathways for career advancement? Does this exist? Does this exist for social workers? Can you look into that and see how can we retain the people that we've grown with and that your agency has grown with? And also provide programmatic efforts that allow social service staff to acquire new skills and new responsibilities. We thank you for hiring social workers. I personally thank you, because if you are here, maybe you're at the brink of doing that or have done so now for many years. And this is just a little push to see if you can continue to value the profession in any of these ways. And I think now I'm going to pass it to Jasmine and Marissa as we walk into the Q&A.
Thank you, Yvonne. So well said. I feel so empowered. Thank you so much for your kind words. As a social worker, thank you. Yeah, we want to open the floor for Q&A. If you have any questions or comments, please drop in on the Q&A box, or if you have a comment, you could put it in the chat as well. I believe we have one question already, so this will be a perfect question for you, Yvonne. It says, what type of social workers do you recommend for each service model?
Oh, yes, exciting. Okay, so in the manual, which we're so excited, you can't see it, but I'm holding it in my hand. you will be able to see exactly that. So the case management or the service model 1 to service model 3, it really is going into a tiered approach, meaning I think a case manager could be a BSW level, a bachelor's level, a licensed bachelor's level. And then obviously the therapist would be clinically licensed, maybe an LCSWS, a supervisor. And then the LMSW could range with supervision, right? If your agency prefers master's level, because you just never know what type of client you're going to get, and you want to have the ability to have that in-depth care, then, you would do LMSW for service model 1 and 2, LCSW for service model 3.
And I would just add that in the resource, there's a chart where you can see how the 6 organizations that Yvonne spoke with decide to structure their teams with, what credentials and what service models. So I think that's super helpful if you want some examples. And there's a real breadth in terms of team size for the organizations. So also you can look there depending on how small or how big you are.
Perfect. We have another question. It says, regarding case management model of integration, why is there an emphasis on only when needed for the bullet point about biopsychosocial assessments and service plan? I guess we would need to go back to the.
Okay, one more time, because
Okay. It says, regarding the case management model of integration, why is there an emphasis on only when needed for the bullet point about biopsychosocial assessments and service plan?
Sure. Yes. So I think that a couple of things, and again, I want you to see this resource as something that you can adopt and change as long as both parties are aware of what that model is going to look like. But for example, some agencies may want to use a case manager for one-time needs. Social worker, or Yvonne, this is a referral in need of housing, right? This is a referral. The lawyer has sort of provided you with already the detailed information that you need. And if you have, which I don't recommend when I'm providing an example, but if you have 50 of those, right, the biopsychosocial will not possibly be something that you can do with each of those. However, if you want to implement a biopsychosocial, which is good practice and best practice, for not that one-time referral, then we're really looking at clinical case management as a service model.
Thank you, Yvonne. We have another one. This one is a little long, so bear with me. It says, does the new CILA resource address anything about unauthorized practice of law? Since when I was a social worker within an LSP, it was an important thing to know about, not just theoretically, but how it looks in practice and where the line is drawn. Honestly, it didn't become clear to me until I was explained explicitly with hypothetical scenarios, which was not provided by internal training by attending a 1-week training of DOJ accredited reps. So the question is, how does the new CILA resource address anything about unauthorized practice of law?
We don't go into that. I can answer that one, but I think that that's a great point and definitely something that we could work on in the future. I imagine it does come up when you have clients asking you about their legal case, because they're seeing you as part of the legal team.
Yeah.
We also
go ahead.
We also had a comment, and I just wanted to clarify to stop using language that indicates that social workers go into the profession not for the money, that this is harmful language. And I think we would agree. I think what Yvonne was saying is that's what you get told in school, but it's not helpful. So we would agree with that. And then Marisa, there's another one. I don't know if you can see.
It says, can you talk through crisis planning and what it means to have everyone on the team involved? I think for attorneys, we may feel ill-equipped to effectively deal with these situations.
Yes. So crisis planning, well, it's going to vary obviously by size. It's going to vary by how big your LSP is, but I think you probably have already come across with different crises, and you can determine what you want to label as a crisis. Is that a runaway? Is that somebody who is a client who is suicidal, a client who is maybe homicidal? What are you going to do about those situations, especially if they happen in-house, right? Like, especially if they happen at your LSP. And so I think that as a team of integrated professionals, it's good to come up with scenarios in case, case scenarios, and talk through, okay, this happened last week. This happened a year ago. We did not know how to respond to this. There is a death, or there is, people think there's a need to call the police. Maybe we don't want to call the police. All of these scenarios, there needs to be a blueprint. You're not always going to be able to follow that, but there does need to be a blueprint that you can tweak and manage and come to, that isn't just for one person, but that multiple people, part of a crisis team, are able to acknowledge and say, this is what we got to do, and sort of implement that. But I do think that that's a really great question. And I think that I would say take it in steps. I would say determine who wants to be part of that team, or maybe not who wants, but really needs to be involved in that team. Come together, think about case examples, and then really flesh out, like, okay, if this were to happen again today, what do we need to do?
I was just going to add a little bit there if I can. We've gotten some technical assistance requests recently, kind of on crisis planning. I think sometimes the attorney knee-jerk reaction is there's a crisis now. I'm going to call the social worker to deal with it, just because we do feel ill-equipped, like the person said in the question. So I think it's kind of defining when the social worker can respond and when it's actually, not a crisis, and when it's actually a situation where you need to be calling law enforcement, 911. And then the other piece of it is really having an interdisciplinary conversation so that you're informing clients about who to call when different issues come up, and sort of educating them on the implications of law enforcement, child welfare services, all these folks getting involved, because there are implications for their legal case. So I think there is some organizational interdisciplinary planning to be done on crisis response.
Yeah, and to add to that, I'm always the believer to be proactive, and even if you don't get a lot of crisis practice, maybe, I don't know what will be maybe once a month, like, let's practice that we get this type of crisis. Let's refresh our resources. Are they still up to date? Just so when the crisis does come, you're gonna be prepared. So yes, the whole team should be involved for sure. Thank you. There is one more question. What are some examples, outcome measures you recommend tracking?
Sure. I mean, I think this is a larger conversation between the social worker and the lawyers as part of a team, but we can look at client satisfaction, resolution of time, have they reached legal relief, improvement of quality of life for our clients with social workers being involved, the reduction in risk factors. And this is something that I explain, and especially in implementing some of the screeners that are available to us, where we're going to be able to see in due time, hopefully, the reduction of symptoms as well.
Thank you. Okay, I think the rest, you're typing, Jasmine, on that one.
Yes, this was a question about sort of templates for what to provide clients about how the information will be shared. We don't have any in the resource, but I can follow up with that person by email with any resources. So I'll do that.
I don't think hold on. Okay. I think that was the last question. Let me make sure that. Okay. There's something on the chat. I think we're good. Okay, I think do you have a particular skill that has been developed with forcefully displaced individuals? Oh, forcefully displaced individuals.
So I don't know who said that, but Diana, I'm happy. You feel free to reach out to me. I do have some measures in mind that we've used in a healthcare setting with individuals who have been forcefully displaced. So my contact information will be on the slide, and I'm happy to be able to talk to you about that. I think that's important. Thank you.
Okay, I think let me double check. I think there's something else. Is there any support that LSPs can provide to clients if we don't have our own social workers? Yes, there is a lot of
Yes.
support out there, and that is getting acquainted with all your local resources, making, if you can make that face-to-face connection with those resources, that's going to help greatly, especially if you're in a very rural or small town where there's not a lot of resources. There's a lot of national resources now. I guess one of the good things that came out of the pandemic is that a lot of services now are virtual, so you could connect clients, for mental health services. If there's not someone in person, you could connect them with someone virtual. And there's people like us that we provide technical assistance to people in the Acacia network. So if we could ever be a support to you, please do not hesitate to reach out. I don't know if Yvonne has anything else that she wants to add to that.
I think we're coming up on time, but we do have all of our contact information on the next slide. And you guys will, of course, be able to access the slides on our training page, or you can reach out to us. And we just would encourage you, when you close out, to please fill out the feedback survey. If you like this training, or if there were things you didn't like, it's all okay. It's constructive. Let us know how we can do more and do better.
Yes, thank you. And just a few last reminders, if you're gonna be seeking CLE credit, please be on the lookout for that email that I'm gonna be sending out either this evening or tomorrow morning with more information regarding that. And again, the survey is gonna pop as soon as the webinar finishes. You're gonna get the survey that is gonna pop on your screen. Please take the time to let us know how we did, or if you have any ideas on future trainings that you would like to see. Here, I just wanted to highlight that we have a Pro Bono Matters where we host a platform. So please check it out if that's something that you would like to do. And for more information, I think the links have been included in there. So check it out. We, of course, have a social work program that complements the legal service providers here at CILA. We focus on the same key areas as the legal component, which is capacity building, collaboration, and community building, technical assistance, resource development. I included some links here, which you're going to be getting once you get the PowerPoint. It's also on the webpage that was created for this webinar. We also have a blog, so we write something, a relevant topic at least once a month, so check it out if you get some time. We're on social media, so follow us. We're cool. No, you'll stay up to date on resources and trainings. That's a good way to also stay up to date on what is going on in the unaccompanied world. So check it out. And yeah, so stay connected. Don't be a stranger. If we could ever be a support to you, don't hesitate to reach out by submitting a technical assistance request, either legal or social service. We also have a newsletter that goes out monthly. It's an electronic newsletter where we highlight resources, updates, litigation, upcoming trainings. And we, if you have a celebration, if you have something, if you have a coworker or someone that you want to nominate for, they maybe had a successful case or maybe something great happened, you could share that with us and we'll highlight them on our newsletter. So yes, check it out. And of course, thank you so much. We have much gratitude for all you do. We are very grateful. We see you. We know that all of you matter and you are making a great difference in the lives of these children. And together we could do so much more. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you, Marisa.
Thank you, everyone.